Last week we were talking about the Joseph saga, and at the conclusion of the story, Joseph's family is all reunited in Egypt. They're being well treated, well fed, cared for, and appreciated for what they bring to Egypt. Now, in this text today, we are a couple generations later. We have a new Pharaoh. The Pharaoh has never met Joseph or probably heard of him. And the Israelites are seen as a threat to the Egyptians because they were growing in such numbers. There were so many of them. So by that time, the Israelites were being treated very badly. They were being oppressed. They had been enslaved. They were being abused. In fact, it got to the point where the Pharaoh ordered that all of the baby sons of the Israelites should be tossed into the Nile and drowned. And it's into that setting that we find God interceding for the oppressed. This is not a story of Israel versus Egypt. This is a story of God, God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, facing down a despot, Pharaoh, facing down one who claimed to be God himself. Let me ask you, how many of you have ever seen the movie, The Ten Commandments? The Ten Commandments, it's kind of a vintage piece. I think came out when I was a little boy, so it's at least 20 years old. But I see it still being shown on network TV every Holy Week. So somebody continues to watch it. And if you have seen it, you would remember this particular scene at the Red Sea when Moses, played by Charlton Heston before he got a rifle, holds out a staff and the sea divides. People pour through. And it was an extraordinary thing to see on film, especially at that time. That was a special effect before we were used to seeing such things. It was most amazing. Somebody told me back then that was all a whole bunch of jello that they put up. That's not true. But that's what I believed for a long time. We have that image of the people walking through the Red Sea is very much a part of our collective memory. I think that's interesting. The people's memory, though, the Israelites' memory was so very short. I told you they were being terribly oppressed in Egypt. They wanted more than anything to be free. God interceded through Moses to gain their freedom. They come pouring out into the wilderness. Moses leads them away from Egypt. They're joyous. But then they hear, coming from behind them, the army of the Egyptians, the most technologically advanced army in the world at that time. Those chariots that we read about, that's equivalent to our stealth bombers of today. Whoever had those was going to win the day, right? So it was terrifying to see them come chasing after the Israelis who had nothing basically to fight with. And so they're heading toward the sea, and they start doing what people do. When they're unhappy, they turn to their leader and they start complaining, "How could you bring us out here into the wilderness like that? Were there no graves in Egypt? You had to bring us out here into the wilderness to be slaughtered by the Egyptians." People's memories are short. You know, we never know what God has in store. I tend to say frequently, I plan, God laughs. I never know what God has in store. For instance, I never imagined at this point in life being at Trinity Lutheran Church. But, may have noticed I'm here. God had something else in store. We plant, God laughs. And that's the way it was for the Israelis. They couldn't see what the future held. And God had extraordinary things in mind. Last week, the scene with Joseph showed God at work in a quiet, kind of understated way, behind the scenes. Quietly, he made things happen so that Joseph and his family would be cared for. He allowed Joseph to interpret dreams so he would rise quickly in the Pharaoh's eyes. He uses all of the human systems which are badly broken to bring about safety and prosperity, reunification and reconciliation with Jacob's family. This week's story from Exodus 14 is God delivering people again, but there's nothing quiet about it. Now here, there's the hooves of the horses that are pounding the pavement, the dirt. The Israelis cry out in fear. The Egyptians scream in panic amidst the waters. And all of that is added to the cloud of smoke and fire that God is portraying. It all comes together to describe a big, chaotic mess. And given this chaos, it seems all the more remarkable what Moses calls the Israelis to do. He says, stand, see, keep still. He says to them specifically, do not be afraid, stand firm, see the deliverance that the Lord will accomplish for you this day. For the Egyptians who you see this day, you will never see again. The Lord will fight for you, and you have only to keep still. As they were being chased down by this technologically advanced army, the Israelis, I cannot believe, were inclined to be quiet, to stand still. You know, in my psychology studies, they told me that when you're threatened, there's either fight or flight, right? Fight or flight. Those are the options. But standing still, being quiet, and observing, well, no, that's really not more likely to be. But the mandate from God here is neither to fight nor to flee, but rather to witness, to observe God's power and might. God will do the fighting for them. And that detail underscores the fact that all of the agency in this story belongs to God. This will be God's victory alone. People of Israel, as well as the Egyptians, see the Lord's glories that far surpass anything that Pharaoh could claim or even imagine. The contest that day is the climax of an ongoing dispute between Pharaoh and the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob that had gone on through the whole first half of the book of Exodus. For 13 chapters that had gone until finally we're at the climactic point. And now this day, it will be utterly clear. This is no split decision. No, God wins an outright victory. And the people of Israel are set free. If the Joseph story showed us everyday miracles that we can see around us, God working in, with, and under our everyday lives, then this is a once-in-a-lifetime, once-in-a-millennium, once-in-an Old Testament miracle. This is probably the most important chapter in the Old Testament. Because it's the fact that God saved the people of Israel at the Red Sea is the rock foundation for that relationship between God and His people. And throughout the Old Testament, throughout the Jewish Bible, you find that the people remind God, and God reminds the people people of this particular historic moment. In the opening lines of the New Testament, God declares, I am the Lord your God, who brought you out of the land of Egypt, out of the house of slavery. You shall have no other gods before me. The people of Israel, you see, have been freed in order to worship and to serve God by keeping the commandments. This story of the Exodus testifies to we Christians today about the power of God to defeat an oppressor and to deliver the oppressed. Excuse me. When we read about God's redemption of humanity in the New Testament, we should remember that God has been delivering God's people all along. From the waters of the flood, from the famine, from slavery in Egypt, from exile in Babylon. And as readers of that sacred story, you and I, we are called to join the Israelites in witness to God's victory, to stand and to see and to know that I am God. It's important to us because you and I, too, have been set free through a journey through the waters. In our case, it's the waters of baptism. You know? We have all experienced baptism. We have seen baptism. And what do we do in baptism? Not much. Well, we observe, we stand, and see what goes on take place. God is the actor, and he acts in an extraordinary way. I think I've told the story of my first son's baptism before here, but I'm going to touch on it again. Rick, I think, is 36. You know, it changes every year, so. But I think that's right. But when he was born very prematurely. He was 2.5 pounds, 36 years ago. And, it wasn't clear that he would survive the first night. He did. And so in the morning, I called a friend and asked him to come and baptize the baby. And when he got there to the neonatal unit, the very first neonatal unit in the South, there was Rick, a tiny child, gasping for each breath. His skin was so thin that you could clearly see the veins through his skin, and you could see blood moving through the veins. It was scary. My friend baptized the baby, and when he got done, Alice and I know both of us were crying, but we knew that day for sure that God had given to Rick something we could never give him. He gave him life in relationship that day. We knew for sure. We didn't know whether Rick would live or die. We didn't know that for a long time. But we knew from that time forward that our God held our son in his hands. And somehow that made it all a little bit better for us. We've all been through baptism. We've witnessed baptisms. But to exercise the freedom given by God in baptism, at some point, we're going to have to gird up our loins, if you will, and take a step forth in faith. If you remember the Israelis coming to the sea, if you remember that scene from the Ten Commandments, they get there and all of a sudden the sea has divided, but there are walls of water on either side. I'm on the bank of the shore. Do I step into that? Do you step into it? They made the choice. They made a choice that was encouraged because of the Egyptians. They made a choice to step in to that situation. Can you imagine? Walls of water on either side. Was that terrifying? Yeah, I bet you it was. You and I, we will face those challenges. Maybe not just like that one, but we will face challenges, and we'll be unsure, and we'll be uncomfortable, and we will wonder, am I up to it? Rick, this tiny baby, he did grow up to be a man. And a few years ago, he called me and said, Dad, they want me to stand for church council in church. He says, I'd be the youngest one on council by 20, 30 years. He says, what do you think? We talked tonight, and I said, well, you know, it sounds as though they have seen in you leadership ability and a deep faith. I see it too. Now you've got to figure out how to deal with that with regard to this particular challenge. He went on, he stood for election, he was elected to church council. A year later he called me and he says, Dad, I am now on the church council. I'm the youngest by 25 or 30 years, and they are asking me to become the president of the church council. What do you think? We had the same discussion. I came to the same point. Now you have to decide. Today he's the president of his church council. He was very unsure. He did not see himself in that role. You know, Lutherans are good at being unsure. And if we're not really sure of something, we tend not to go a step forward because we don't want to make a mistake. We don't want to make anybody feel uncomfortable. If we're unsure, we tend to, stand still, not do anything, right? But there are times, we all face those times, those different challenges. Everybody will face different challenges. But when we face those times when we are unsure, we are not comfortable, but we are asked to step forward in faith, to do something that's important. The Israelites, they stepped through the waters that day, and they found freedom. Each of us will have challenges that we go through, and we will ask ourselves, how do I deal with that particular challenge? This is a story that tells us very clearly that we will face those challenges not alone. That our God is with us in the risen Christ, helping us to find a way. That's why we come here to church on Sunday mornings. To hear the stories, yes, but for me at least, most importantly, to receive Christ Jesus in the Word and in the sacrament. As we come to the table now, we will receive the bread and the wine, and as we do so, we will receive Jesus. He will be there for us, throwing his arms around us, helping to know we are truly loved, we are forgiven, and he takes us from the death of sin to a life of forgiveness and reconciliation, a new beginning, and then he promises to be with us as we go from this place out into our world, to face the challenges that we will face this week, knowing that he is with us, to encourage